There we go. Okay, I think we are now officially recording, and with any luck, that's happening. And I'll also just mention that this is a publicly noticed meeting of the Council's advisory bodies, and advisory body members should feel free to use the raise hand feature anytime you'd like to speak or ask a question, and that can be found in the reactions button, under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. And as time allows, we may also be able to take questions from non-advisory body members who are on the call, the call or on the webinar, but there is also a public comment period scheduled for 1:30 p.m. Or immediately after agenda item C, whichever comes first. And we just ask that you use the chat feature for logistical questions or to post links or other helpful information, but please try to avoid using it for very substantive questions or comments, just so that they don't get lost in the shuffle. And with that, I will turn things over to Tommy Moore for the agenda overview and any other opening remarks.
Great, thanks, Gilly. Yeah, so this is first of three of these style of meetings for the 3 IRA projects. Excuse me. And the ecosystem advisory bodies have been tasked by council with kind of shepherding these through for the next couple years, and these projects are basically taking the place of the FEP initiatives that we normally run, and that we're currently in the process of wrapping up initiative 4. I think for opening up, rather than doing a round of introductions, just because we've got over 30 people on the call, I think I'll just ask folks to do a virtual introduction in the chat, just for the sake of timeliness. And I think most of us know, we know, or at least I know the bulk of people on here, but not everybody. If need be, we can do introductions as they arise when folks ask questions or make comments. So briefly, our agenda here. Gilly's generously allotted time for me to ramble on ad nauseum about the agenda and opening remarks. So I plan on using up all of my time and dragging this on. Not really, but we do have 4 hours scheduled for today's meeting. We'll see if we need it all. If the discussion on the project goes quickly, we may not. So see how that goes. But regardless, we do have a good block of time here. And initially, just looking at the detailed agenda here, make sure I don't miss anything. Our major overarching goals for this meeting are to discuss the projects in greater detail, make sure everyone is familiar with the goals and deliverables of the projects, and then get into some discussion on the roles, responsibilities, information needs, and expertise requirements for the project. Review any next steps for formalizing the work plan. Clarify the 2025 year-at-a-glance schedule. So kind of when are we checking in, who's doing the checking in, that type of things. And then any other issues that may arise. And yeah, and then we'll kind of work through the projects and hopefully get this fleshed out and everybody on the same page, because I know there's a lot of interest in the projects, but also a lot of apprehension around what's actually being asked and who's doing what. So I think it's all well-intentioned, and everyone's hopeful to make this as successful as possible. It's just making sure that everyone knows what they're doing. So with that, I think I will pass it over to Gilly for B on the overview of the IRA projects.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tommy. And if assuming there are no, I'm just trying to make sure that I can see questions if they are asked, but if somebody's hand goes up and I miss it, feel free to just chime in at any juncture. But with that, I will go ahead and just get started with a quick little just overview of the IRA projects in general, and then we'll zero in on project number 1 for today. And I apologize. I imagine folks may be already pretty familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, as it's often shorthanded. But just by way of background, or in case it's a helpful refresher, the Inflation Reduction Act was a budget reconciliation bill that was signed into law in August of 2022, and included historically large investments in climate resilience, mitigation, and adaptation across multiple federal agencies. And of IRA's hundreds of billions of dollars in climate and energy related spending, 3.3 billion was provided to NOAA broadly, with 1.2 billion of that going to National Marine Fisheries Service. And of that 1.2 billion, $20 million was set aside as part of a sort of a grant process for regional fishery management councils to access through grant proposals. And in order to qualify for these IRA funds, the grant proposals that were submitted to NIMS by the regional councils needed to be for activities that broadly to basically one of two things, or possibly both: the implementation of fishery management measures necessary to advance climate-ready fisheries by improving climate resiliency and responsiveness to climate impacts, and/or the development and advancement of climate-related fisheries management planning and implementation efforts, including those in support of underserved communities. And I believe it's the case that might be have a little background noise, but hopefully that helped a little. Sorry about that. All 8 councils applied for and received funding from this pool of $20 million. And the Pacific Council received funding for 3 projects that it had proposed, for a total of just over $2 million. And that's over the course of a sort of I'd say about a 3-year period now, because all project funds must be committed by the end of 2027 by law. So under the Inflation Reduction Act, my understanding is that all the money needs to be either spent or planned to be spent by the end of 2027. So exactly-ish 3 years from now. Each of the Pacific Council's proposals have their origins in or draw very heavily on the council's existing fishery ecosystem plan, potential future initiatives, as well as some of the priorities and follow-on activities from the council's climate and communities initiative that wrapped up in 2021, or at least the scenario planning efforts that wrapped up in 2021. And before I move on from that, I was just wondering if anybody had any questions broadly about the sort of the IRA sort of funding source and where the money came from, et cetera. Great, I don't think I see any questions there. So just real quickly, with respect to the IRA projects that the Pacific Council proposed, there are 3 of them, and folks have probably heard a little bit about these already, so thanks for bearing with me. And I'll mention that the original project proposals are available as a PDF on the meeting notice pages for each of the kickoff meetings, including today's. And I'll just mention that, of course, today's is for Project 1, which is, the full title is Innovating the Implementation of Council Actions to Respond to the Dynamic Ocean Environment. And we've been sort of shorthanding that as Adaptive Management Response, as just sort of a way to sort of get straight to it. Project number 2 is Considering the Effects of Council Management Actions on Human Well-Being in Vulnerable Fishing Communities Impacted by a Changing Marine Ecosystem. And we've been calling that the Community Resilience Decision Tools, or Dashboard project. And the kickoff meeting for that one is this Friday, December 13th. Hopefully that's not too ominous, at starting at 12 noon. And there's a project notice page on the website with all the login info for that as well. And then finally, project number 3 is developing climate-ready fishing methods that mitigate bycatch of non-target associated species in a changing environment. And we've been sort of shorthanding this one as the Bycatch Mitigation and HMS Roadmap Support Project. And the kickoff meeting for that one is next Tuesday, December 17th, starting at 12 noon. And again, the more information is available on the council's calendar and associated meeting notice pages. And I was just going to mention it may be helpful to think of these proposals as basically as grant proposals, which is essentially what they are, where NIMS headquarters is the entity that has issued the grants, and the council is the grantee, of course, is receiving the funding. And for these three kickoff meetings, starting with today's, the objectives and the project goals, et cetera, and the work described here is based almost entirely on the content of the project proposals as they were submitted to NIMFS. And while we've started to discuss a little bit within the council advisory bodies and the EWG and the EAS, how the work might proceed, additional details, and really almost all of the details, will be more fully fleshed out in consultation with advisory bodies more broadly, but especially the EWG and the EAS. And that's where this series of kickoff meetings and conversations comes in, to sort of get these conversations sort of started in a more robust way, but also through, we'll also be regularly updating advisory bodies broadly in connection with council meetings and in between council meetings as well. Before I move on, are there any questions on any of this stuff? I don't think I see anything. Excellent. Wonderful. So without too much further ado, I was just going to run through some of the IRA Project 1 information. And I'm hoping that, I think this can be like a pretty informal conversation. I just have a few slides here to start us off, but please feel free to jump in with questions at any juncture. And if it makes sense to folks, I can sort of run through the slides and then we can return to any of them for further discussion or additional details, or if people have questions that come up after the fact, et cetera. And I think, as Tommy mentioned at the beginning, opening remarks, that some of the goals for this discussion could include like learning more about what Project 1 is, what even is this, discussing roles and responsibilities, information needs, et cetera. Some conversations around the timeline for some of the work, and just really just trying to answer or discuss any questions that folks may have. This can be sort of almost like a brainstorming session, if that's helpful to think of it that way. But it can definitely be pretty free roaming. And again, to ask a question, you can raise your hand under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. And just as a reminder, you just need to go back in afterwards to lower your hand. It does not happen automatically, unfortunately. And so with that, I will get us started on just a quick overview here of Project 1, Adaptive Management Response. So the problem that was identified in this proposal for Project 1 is that climate change will very likely affect the availability and distribution of target, non-target, protected, and unmanaged species in council-managed fisheries. Shifts in availability and distribution could happen, and in many cases already are happening, on relatively short timescales, and this requires faster, more nimble management responses in order to keep up with these changes as they are happening more rapidly and in greater concentration and amounts. And the proposed approach, as identified in this project, is to identify pathways and innovations or potential changes to existing decision-making and management processes that can increase the speed, efficiency, and timeliness of management actions at the council, and also ideally in concert with NIMS regulatory processes as well. Oops. Sorry about that. So here's a slide with a lot of text on it, my apologies. But this is just sort of a quick outline of the goals and hoped for outcomes associated with this project as described in the proposal. For this project, the aim would be to identify ways, as I just mentioned, to make review and implementation of council management actions more timely, efficient, and responsive to a changing and increasingly less predictable ocean environment. And as such, this particular project connects most closely to the Council's potential future FEP Initiative 2.8, which in turn emerged out of the Council-sponsored climate change scenario planning work that was completed in March of 2021. And a main goal here would be to improve the Council's ability to respond to both near-term climate shifts and longer-term climate change, as identified in the Council's Climate and Communities Initiative scenario planning effort. And a key outcome would hopefully be a streamlined decision-making framework and related implementation process for at least one Council regulatory or FMP amendment proposal. That was sort of identified as the kind of the outcome. Now then, for project activities under this project, there are sort of three core chunks of work that are identified. And this is where, of course, the rubber's going to meet the road, and we can absolutely talk about what these various things might be or what they could look like, et cetera. But the first is to develop a white paper that explores the different aspects of Council decision-making and related federal regulatory processes needed to implement Council proposals and recommendations. And this is a paper that would identify sort of the typical choke points or bottlenecks that can lengthen these processes. And then also it would discuss approaches to perhaps open up these bottlenecks or make them less bottlenecky. And then the Council may choose to form some sort of working group or committee made up of a wider array of experts or stakeholders to explore existing and potential opportunities to speed up process timelines and associated implementation mechanisms. And then finally, the Council would then apply the ad hoc committee's recommendations or their learnings to an in-progress management action. And then sort of longer term, the Council could seek to continuously improve this streamlined framework as it is applied across a broader range of proposed Council actions. And I should mention that because this is the first of the three kickoff meetings, I just wanted to highlight the one, well, there may be more than one thing that each project has in common, but one that is a sort of a common thread across all three is that the end goal for each of the projects is to apply the tools and procedures developed through each project to a specific Council action by the end of 2027, by the end of the grant period. And it's anticipated that that hopefully all three projects will culminate in an application to a Council action, or maybe more than one, if depending on how things go. So I just wanted to flag that. And this might be getting ahead of ourselves a tiny little bit, but this is just sort of like a very tentative timeline, a straw person timeline, if you will, that sort of just lays out some of the key steps that are identified in the project proposal. And again, this can sort of, not only can the dates change, but as we talk here about what makes sense for, are there pieces of work that should maybe, sort of shift around a little bit or anything like that. But essentially, this is sort of the overarching layout of the next few years with respect to this project. So starting with further development of a white paper, and I should mention, I didn't say this before, but Dr. Kit Dahl has gotten the ball rolling on the white paper as it was sort of anticipated when the proposal was being prepared, that Council staff would help develop the white paper and then sort of have something to be able to share more broadly with partners throughout the Council family. And because Kit will be retiring painfully soon, painful for those of us that remain, but we're very happy for him. He has actually started has a draft of that white paper going so that we can have sort of the contents of Kit's brain in the context of that white paper. And then, but it's, of course, it's something that has yet to be sort of completed and shared more broadly or anything like that. But it's underway, which just to sort of get the ball rolling before Kit's retirement date next month. So so for winter 2025, we have just sort of further development of the white paper. And then flowing from there are just sort of kind of almost like placeholder dates. Like there is an item on the April 2025 council meeting agenda for an update to the council on this project, whether it's the presentation of a work plan or a discussion of the white paper. I think it remains to be seen what that looks like. But again, a topic that we can tackle a little bit today. And then sort of flowing from there, does the council actually form a working group, or is it more of a project development team or something a little more informal that meets to identify opportunities? Then the proposal anticipates the development of a report that gets down to brass tacks about which places these opportunities to speed things up could be applied. And then there would be an opportunity for further review of that report by the advisory bodies and others. And then flowing from there, council review of the report, and then the selection of an action, and then taking about a year or maybe less, depending on what the action is, to apply that the recommendation to a council action, and then culminating in consideration of a selected action, with the action itself being a completely unselected thing at this point. Nobody would like that. That is something that has not been identified at all. So, so I think that is sort of the gist of the sort of very tentative timeline. And then that just sort of brings us to sort of just different planning ideas or questions, or sort of these topics that we could discuss around what are information needs that exist, what areas of expertise would be helpful for this project, given its focus on regulatory flexibility and efficiencies, the roles and responsibilities of advisory bodies, if folks would like to talk about that. And just the next sort of big thing on the horizon is an update to the council that's tentatively scheduled for April 2025 for the meeting that's going to be happening in San Jose this spring. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions, comments at this juncture. And then we can just sort of go through and see if people want to go back and dig into any of the specifics.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks for this presentation, Gilly. I've brought this up a couple times and I just can't remember where the connection is or how it's being used, but the Nature Conservancy previously did kind of a white paper on flexibility in the council process for each one of the FMPs. And I was wondering how that is being used or advanced in this new white paper.
Excellent question. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, that is something that that we've been, I think, talking about as being sort of like an ingredient of, or a something that could be built upon or referred to in the white paper. And just because, yeah, there's been some great work that's been done on that, specific to the council's FMPs. And so I think that there could be some leveraging of that, absolutely. And the white paper might be a little bit broader, and then it would look sort of at legal and statutory requirements outside of the FMPs, but I think for the focus on the council's obligations within its FMPs, that's definitely would be a significant chunk, I think. And I might actually turn things over for a second to Kit to see if he has any smarter thoughts on that than what I just prattled on about.
Sure, I can mention that since I wrote the paper. I did consult that paper among other sources. I guess the one thing I would say is that Nature Conservancy paper, as I recall, takes a a broader look at the concept of flexibility, I guess you would say, in the sense that it's looking at both flexibility in terms of, you know, organizational or sort of legal regulatory flexibility, and also flexibility in the operation of firms and fishing communities and so on. And I think this project is more narrowly focused on the former, looking at process issues, if you will. So just make that distinction.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kit. Thanks, Gilly. And I'll put a link to the report in the chat just so that everyone has it. I saw that question. Thanks.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you. Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Yeah, so I guess just looking to see if we have any more, detailed questions about the presentation. Otherwise, I think the next part of the agenda is our just general discussion of the project, I believe, unless I'm getting ahead of myself. Oh, go ahead, Allison.
Hi, this is Allison Shields. I'm filling in for Shems Judd today with the Environmental Defense Fund. And maybe this is a question better suited for the next portion, so feel free to put a pin in it if necessary. But I have two questions, actually. EDF completed a white paper also a couple of years ago that was about integrating climate information into decision making to support more resilient fishery management decision making. And one of the things identified in that is to identify on-ramps for information. And the presentation noted that the white paper will focus on identifying choke points that slow down the process. And I was wondering if the white paper will also analyze those on-ramps that actually might help facilitate uptake of climate information into management. And then my second question is, beyond the potential ad hoc work group that's going to be set up after the white paper, how does the council plan to engage stakeholders in the white paper development?
Thank you so much, Allison. I can try to take a swipe at crack at both of those. I think that with respect to the first question, yes, I'm familiar with I think I'm familiar with the EDF white paper. I love how many white papers there are. We should start calling like the eggshell paper or the ivory paper, but the different shades. But the draft that Kit has been working on does definitely connects to some of the on-ramp discussions. Absolutely, like looking at different sort of potential pathways for increasing efficiency. So yeah, the emphasis on choke points and bottlenecks is sort of like the negative side of the coin, and that there's definitely going to be, I think, a pretty robust conversation in there about other approaches to both bringing in information and also speeding up the sort of the timeline on things without losing rigor along the way. So yes, I think to the first question for sure. And then your second question, I believe, was that regarding the council's plan for bringing in stakeholders to the broader conversation, or more specifically to the to the white paper.
Yes, I asked about the white paper, but actually also wondering if stakeholders could also be asked about what management actions they think should be addressed through this work as a potential way to increase community buy-in.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. While there isn't necessarily, I think, a whole lot of things scheduled yet on the calendar for this project, except for the only one that I think currently is agendized is the April 2025 sort of check-in or update conversation at the council. But there will be multiple opportunities through the council process, through advisory body conversations, but also things that will be posted in the briefing book that would be available for comment, but in draft forms, that there would be ways of bringing in input from folks sort of across the board through sort of just the regular council process. There may also be, I think, depending on what the council decides to do about this sort of this, maybe if there is an ad hoc working group or a committee of some kind that gets formed, and I'm not entirely sure what that pathway might look like, or if the council might choose to do something a little different. I don't know. But there may also be an opportunity for stakeholder participation in that entity, whatever that ends up being. So I think there could be a few different entry points for bringing in more stakeholder input, feedback, and engagement. And I apologize, it's not more specific than that, but I think it's a great thing that we should be keeping in mind for sure, and making sure that that stays in the mix as we trundle along.
Yeah, no worries. I recognize it's early on, but appreciate that it's kept in mind.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Looking to see if we have any other questions. Otherwise, I think we can just move into our open discussion on the project. Unless you had more you wanted to speak to, Gilly.
I don't think so. I have this pretty picture as a sort of a planning slide, but yeah, but this would be a great time to sort of shift into other questions or going a little bit deeper on any of these
Okay.
pieces.
I was wondering if you can go back to the project goals and outcomes slide you had, and just kind of, so just as a prompter for where we can start our discussion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that slide and the next one, just as a
Perfect, yeah.
visual prompt.
Great. Yep. There's the activities piece. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess just this is me going into areas that I'm not fully certified to be in, but for this white paper, I think not just looking at the council's flexibility, we also, I think it'd be good to have a write-up on what happens on the NIMS side of things when a council makes a recommendation, because not all of the time spent on getting things done is just in the council process. NIMS has to go through and review and approve recommendations and changes. So I would, one thought is just make sure that we're exploring that side as well, because there is some level of NIMS bureaucracy that council has no authority over, can't be more efficient on. And this is me coming from somebody who doesn't write the policies and tries to avoid that type of thing when possible. But any specific examples we can have of where council's lack of flexibility and nimbleness has impacted fisheries and fishing communities would be great, because just to give some examples of, this is, rather than waving our arms at a general choke point, this is an actual choke point that has been encountered in the past, and this could be something that can come from stakeholders or the broader fishing community as well. But just trying to be as kind of detailed and, I guess, evidence-based as possible, for lack of a better phrase. And if no one else raises their hand, I can continue to. Oh, go ahead, Yvonne. I was looking at the wrong slide. And Allison, do you have a residual hand up? Or did you have another question?
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Yvonne.
So on the NIMS process, I just wanted to comment that there is much about the NIMS process, regulatory process, that has nothing to do with NIMS itself, and there are larger requirements coming at us from NOAA and from the Department of Commerce or the Council on Environmental Quality. And we basically don't control much of that process. So I would say that I hope this project will make a distinction between, I mean, the council itself can't do anything to make NIMS more efficient, except to choose to make decisions that can flow into a more efficient NIMS process. And what I mean by that is the council, the Pacific Council, deliberates. An example is the Pacific Council deliberates more on EFPs than most other fishery management councils, and certainly more than is required under law or regulation. And that's fine. And we are helped by the deliberation that occurs in the Pacific Council process. But that deliberation is not necessary to the development and implementation of EFPs, and it's not required. So then the question is, does the council want to reduce its deliberation on EFPs? And if they don't, that's fine. It's just that they are then choosing the less efficient NIMS regulatory process. So think about it from that perspective. What can the council do to choose decision pathways that result in more efficient NIMS processes, rather than thinking about it from the perspective of what can the council do to change NIMS's regulatory process, because the council can't. Thanks. Hope that was clear.
Yes, thanks, Yvonne. Much better said than my rambling. Go ahead, Teresa, followed by Corey.
Thanks. That was a great point, I think, Yvonne. And I was actually going to pop back to Allison's comment and just looking at Project One and the slide on the screen, I am immediately drawn to the work that's kind of ongoing at the council and with Initiative 4 and trying to figure out where it fits into the council process, how the council does this, where does it make the move, when can it make the move, if something comes from the, climate information comes out in between stock assessments, how do we use it? And it seems like this is sort of this objective is almost tailor made to some of the problems that we're having with that project right now. And so is that something, I don't know if that's probably too soon, because this is like, where could you use this? But I'm wondering if something like the current work on Initiative 4 is something contemplated as meeting the objective and the management needs of this project, and if that's been thought of in development of this work plan.
Oh, sorry, Tommy, were you just about to?
Oh, no, I'll let you speak to that, Gilly.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. I'll certainly try. Thank you so much, Teresa. And also, yes, thank you, Yvonne, for that that perspective on the sort of the NIMS relationship and the fact that there's that more could potentially be there could be something to be gained by looking at the sort of the front loading of things, which I think is an excellent point. And I think with respect to, thank you, Teresa, to Initiative 4, that is a great question. And I feel like, right, maybe it's probably too soon to speculate what the council may choose to do, but it certainly is something that the council is working on a bunch right now. And are there ways to connect these two sort of work streams in a way that would be constructive and helpful and add to efficiencies. I think it's definitely, it is, I think, very much in the mix. And yeah, I think but probably unable to sort of crystal ball it any further than that. But yeah, I think that especially as Initiative 4 sort of moves into the realm of no longer being Initiative 4, but being, you know, something that the FMP teams are taking and using in real time as they look at ecosystem and climate information and stock assessments and harvest setting processes, et cetera. So our specifications processes. So yes, sorry, that's a very long and rambling way of saying let's definitely keep it in there.
Thanks, Gilly. Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. Coincidentally, before Yvonne spoke, I was thinking that the goals of this one, and for Jessica and Liz and Kit, I mean, it's also sounds like the HMS EFPs are kind of shooting for the same thing. And I guess Yvonne, my thought was, we had the HMS roadmap workshop in San Diego last November, I think it was. Or maybe no, it was not November, but anyway, a lot of people were pointing the finger at the council for slowing up EFPs. And, not that I'm right, but my impression is it's the opposite. June, thanks, Liz. It's NIMS slowing it up, and it's not, and not just for no reasons, but the protected species issues that need to be looked at are the reason that are slowing up those EFPs in my mind. So I guess this is just 2 points. I mean, you can maybe not double counting because I think the HMS roadmap is part of the project 3, but that is just an example that popped in my mind of where else we're talking about are the ways to get new gear innovations through the process quicker.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Corey. Michelle?
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. I have two questions. On the management need that's being addressed in item number 1, which is improving the flexibility for the council to respond. And just wondering if, as part of the white paper and the exploration, is this project going to be looking at potentially changing the timing of the ecosystem information that comes into the council that currently happens every March, as well as the timing of FMP specific decision making that occurs at the council to perhaps shorten the time frame between the two. So that's one question. And then the second question is under management need number 2, and just wondering if perhaps folks on the EWG or others could speak to how there could be work that is occurring at NIMS or planned under through the CEFI, for example, on ecosystem services and community well-being, and how that might dovetail with the proposed straw timeline that's outlined here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Tommy, is it okay if I'll just sort of attempt to answer maybe the first one and then turn it over? Awesome, thank you. Unless you want to tackle the second question, but for the first question, I think that I might ask Kit also if he has any thoughts or additional feedback on this, but I think that it's a great question of whether there needs to be sort of a peek at the sort of the calendar, like the annual calendar for bringing in climate and ecosystem information, et cetera. And I don't know that I don't think that's been discussed yet, but I feel like that it's something that could definitely be absolutely considered or talked about. I know that would be a whole the question of when the ecosystem information through the CCIEA ecosystem status report comes to the council. That's a much bigger question, of course, that affects that's the CCIEA team, and you know, I can't imagine that they're able to necessarily switch things up too dramatically all of a sudden, but there might be ways of bringing it to the council in a way that feeds into other FMP processes that happen on an annual or biannual basis, and being just more sort of, I guess, strategic, for lack of a better term, about where that information comes in and how it can then be utilized for decision making. And that sort of also, I think, maybe goes a little bit to Teresa's question as well regarding Initiative 4 and how that might fit into some of this as far as applications go. So I think much like all sorts of other things, I'll be like, sure, and like, let's put that on the list of things to be thinking about. Because I feel like we don't want to unnecessarily constrain ourselves if we can make relatively straightforward changes that could help with the efficiency piece of things and the responsiveness piece of things. Absolutely. And maybe I'll stop there. And I think maybe your second question was regarding the sort of the relationship between some of this work and the CEFI work.
Yes, that's correct. And then specifically how that could dovetail with the proposed straw timeline that you've outlined.
I can also take a little swipe at that, unless there may be others that are better able to answer that. But yeah, there's definitely I think there might be some interesting synergies or intersections, or at least sort of some parallel kind of I don't know about parallel, but just some sort of similar questions that are being asked in this project. And I think also maybe perhaps to a greater extent, project number 2, which is the one we'll be discussing in greater detail on Friday, regarding community resilience and sort of the socioeconomic intersections, and sort of thinking a little bit more about community vulnerability and resilience in the context of council decision making. And I think that there's definitely some very interesting CEFI work that I think will be taking place, or CEFI funded work that will be taking place, that gets at some of those same kinds of questions. And so I think in terms of the calendar and the sort of the timeline, I think that's a great example of where things might need to stay a little flexible in terms of that straw person list of dates, just because there may be pieces of information either for this project or either of the other 2 projects that are coming from other parts of the sort of the NIMS family and the science centers, and that it may behoove us to make sure that we're considering those pieces of work as they become more fully developed, and being able to sort of use those chunks of brilliance to further amplify or flesh out this work. So yeah, I think there will probably be I don't know, it to the extent that I think everybody's going to be a little bit on the same kind of 2027 timeline, and I'm not 100% sure if that's going to be the CEFI kind of like quote unquote deadline as well. I think that there may be some other flexibility there, but there may also be some pieces of work that are emerging around the same time towards the end of that period of time, and so it'll be interesting to see how easy or difficult it might be to tap into the work that's happening at the science centers and elsewhere to be able to make sure that we're staying abreast of the latest and greatest work that's happening. So that's another like like, oh, I hope we can do that kind of answer without knowing for sure how that might pan out, since there may be some sort of parallel timelines unfolding. But one of the sort of bigger kind of cross-cutting pieces across all three projects is making sure that we're, to the greatest extent possible and without burdening anybody on the Science Center or NIMF side, but staying in frequent or regular or just sort of constructive contact with folks that are working on some of those CEFI projects to make sure that we're all, kind of rowing in the same direction, or I don't know, insert metaphor here, and just not duplicating work or, being, sort of like at perpendicular angles or anything like that. Anyway, sorry, that was like a very lengthy answer to your very good question. And I don't know if anybody else would like to say anything else on that.
Yeah, thanks, Gilly. I think also that would be a good topic or like some of these questions would be good topics to include in the white paper, of not just, bottlenecks in the council efficiency process, but how new information could be included in council decision making. So basically just keep adding on things to the white paper.
And extending Kit's retirement date into the distant future.
There we go. Well, that's the plan. I'll think of all kinds of things to add on. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks for all of this discussion. I just wanted to go back to some of the points made about EFPs and in relation to the HMS kind of roadmap and the EFP framework that's kind of been focused in more under that Project 3. I think really how the team has been looking at this and discussing it is, to kind of Yvonne's point, it's not on the NIMF's side of the process. That is strictly in the NIMF's house. It's more on the council side. And what does the council really want in terms of amount of review that isn't necessarily mandated, but, is that a 1 meeting or 2 meeting process? When does that meeting happen? How do efficiencies look on that side of the council process for EFPs, with HMS EFPs specifically? And then really focusing in more on some of those EFP policy questions on in the council's purview, like what does the council view as acceptable bycatch, et cetera. So I think that kind of EFP framework we have been using it in that context of the roadmap is different than maybe just specifically the time it takes for EFPs to move through the analysis process and be implemented. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I saw Amber's hand go up too, so she can probably extend on that. But really, I also wanted to touch on this idea here of one of the management needs addressed and supported by this project is improving flexibility, it says, and ability to respond to near-term climate shifts and long-term climate change, and then that connection between this and the Climate and Communities Initiative scenario planning. And I think it's really important to maintain the connection for this project, because if we just look at flexibility in fisheries management at the council process on its own, we'll lose that connection to the climate resiliency component. And so just kind of thinking about what that looks like. Does that look like of what flexibility is needed in these different scenarios that we had outlined? And what that might look like. Does that flexibility change? Does the need change based on those different scenarios? And then kind of thinking about too of initiative 4, I do agree that it's trying to bring in some of that connection of bringing climate into the fisheries management process and having it fit in to the current PFMC process for the different FMPs and where it actually can be included in. It's a little bit different than flexibility, but it allows you to be flexible in the sense of adapting to changes in the environment more readily, because it's already built into the process instead of waiting for a big event to occur and then trying to adapt. So just wanted to make that point. And my last point is, I think all of these flexibilities really will need an evaluation too of the council efficiencies, because they're directly tied with that. So the number of meetings, the amount of days, how some of these management decisions could move through the process and where that process would be restricted based on just availability of time, given all of the council's priorities. So a lot there, Gilly. You don't have to respond to any of it. Just wanted to put it out on the record.
Excellent. Oh my gosh, thank you, Jessica. That's amazing. I was trying to scribble things down. I was like, oh, thank God, I'm so glad we're recording this. So I can go back and actually make sure I caught everything. But yes, that all sounds like those are super important things to be maintaining in our brains as we sort of start to move through some of these pieces, and totally agree about the maintaining some a very clear connection to the climate piece of this, since that's what's driving all of the IRA work, and what should be also driving these projects is the questions around opportunities to advance or support the implementation or just the furtherance of climate ready fisheries, and being able to maintain flexibility in the face of climate change is a little different than just being flexible for the sake of speed and efficiency for other reasons. So totally concur, and we'll make note of that. Oh, and sorry, I was just going to say one other quick thing, and then I'm so sorry. I know Amber has her hand up as well, but with respect to the HMS roadmap piece of this, and or the HMS, not piece of this, but the connections that may exist between Project 1 and Project 3, which is the bycatch mitigation project that has a lot of linkages to the development of the HMS roadmap, and specifically its work around EFP frameworks. I think that there will be a there's already, I think Kit has already kind of like flagged sort of some important connections in the draft of the white paper around the way EFPs could be used to kind of test some dynamic ocean management kind of tools, et cetera. So I think, and then just in general, the efficiency question around EFP issuance kind of links back, of course, to the work that is being contemplated under the roadmap, the HMS roadmap. So I think, yeah, all of those connections should be as sort of explicit and kind of discussed as possible / appropriate, for sure. Anyway, I'll stop
Thanks,
there.
Gilly. Yeah, thanks, Gilly. Go ahead, Amber.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, I had put my hand up when Corey was speaking. I think he's right. A lot of the time has been on the NIMP side. We get the recommendations that came pretty quick through the council, and just taking stock of that, it's a little more tricky, I think, in terms of flexibility for EFPs versus for management actions, because I think with the EFPs, the council has generally moved pretty quickly. It has its set of recommendations, and we're sort of tasked with this additional workload of how does all of that relate to our existing regulations that we have to exempt from. So that's like an added workload with EFPs, different than in somewhat different than our FMP amendments or regulatory amendments. I think that sort of discussion of what are we changing is more embedded into council discussion for FMP amendments and regulations. My thought is, if we take it as a given that we're stuck with the statutes and the workload that we need to do to implement these things, then a more streamlined decision framework that is more flexible is one where perhaps the council is looking over a longer timeline and contemplating what changes may happen within that timeline that it would want to adjust to. So we don't fall into a trap where, like with the deep set buoy gear EFPs, we had gotten to issuing them very quickly. We had done the workload. we had an effort level in which we could carbon copy issue EFPs, but we couldn't adjust them easily without then undergoing new implementation workload. And so I think to the degree we can think through and be talking up front about what the outcomes we're seeking are and the goals and objectives are, and think about how that runs along a timeline and what adjustments we might like to make. I think that it's within our ability under the current statutes to try to write that up and have that flexibility without going back and having to redo all of the implementation process, but rather focusing more on what the regulatory change might need to be, or what a term and condition of an EFP might need to be. And that might not require redoing the whole decision package. So those are my comments. I do have to drop for a bit. I will come back and listen in. Just wanted to say, not dropping, because that's all I had to offer her, wanted to hear.
Great. Thanks, Amber. And
Thank you, Amber.
We'll keep in mind the mic drop and for future reference. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, thanks. I've got a comment here and a question. The first is that the comment is the use of the term adaptive management. And I guess I think what we're talking about here is more about adaptive capacity and a much broader concept than adaptive management is typically something is more about sort of adapting to uncertainty with incorporating a sort of a structured way to incorporate new information about uncertainty within a fisheries context, almost like an MSE process or something like that. So you might want to consider avoiding that term adaptive management here, unless, or be more specific about what you're talking about. And my question here is, I guess, sort of a comment as well, really. But I was involved in the New England Council process for quite a long time, and I know they make frequent use of framework adjustments as opposed to amendments to FMPs. And my understanding is that they do that partly because the NEPA process is less involved and quicker. And I don't think that this council uses framework adjustments. And I'm just curious from maybe somebody that knows more about these things, if indeed framework adjustments do provide a quicker, more flexible way to make changes to FMPs. And if so, why we don't use them here.
Thanks, Dan. See if anyone knows anything about framework adjustments. Otherwise, we can add that to the growing list for the white paper, because I think that would be an interesting approach.
This is Gilly. Thank you so much, Dan. Yes, and I think Kit, may have his hand up for another reason, but may also be able to speak to that a little bit, because I think he may have folded in a little bit of framework exploration maybe in the draft, but in general, I think that's, definitely, if it's not already being contemplated, we can absolutely add that to the list. And we can also play around with that management word, because I forgot about I'm now becoming a little more familiar with the term adaptive capacity. And as I've sort of started to work on these projects a little bit, nibbling away, and I think I hear what you're saying, and it sounds like that might be a helpful change, a helpful tweak. So thank you.
All right. Looks like we have Corey, then Kit.
Yeah, I think, well, if Kit wants to, this turning the situation where it's 10 minutes before the topic you want to speak to comes up, but so Kit, but I'll be brief. Amber spoke to what I was going to say. I was pretty well, and I was going to debate Jessica about what the HMS management team is saying, if I'm understanding, because, but I won't. It just not for fun, but because I think it was an example of. It really is going to take the detailed level discussion about exactly what you're talking about, whatever the action is, to really figure this out. We're really at a high generic level here, but it's going to take the digging into the details. And I liked the term Allison used about, you really figuring out what the choke points are and how to then make them less choky, I guess. But yeah, and just on the HMS side, I mean, the council just basically dumped all the FUPs on NIMS, and it was a lot of workload, as Amber described, was kind of thought. But we since kind of moved on. But just, yeah, maybe flag that one as a good example of what it's going to take to really put these ideas into place. And one more thought, Dan. In terms of Dan's, I'm not sure what the what a framework change is exactly, but it made me think of, a lot of us we work on the non-salmon world, but we look to the salmon world on how fast they're able to implement their seasons and in-season changes, and with jealousy, and to me that's the answer we get is, oh, they have that frameworked in so they can do it faster than you can in groundfish. And I've heard, I will not name names, but people within NIMP saying, oh, they're told we can't do it like salmon in other places. But salmon might be one place where the council is able to go really fast. The forecasts come in January, February, whatever. The 2 meetings, March, April, and then the rigs are in place by late May or June. So that's quite a bit faster than the other processes.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Go ahead, Kit.
Yeah, I've been sitting here biting my tongue while everybody's talking about this white paper nobody's seen or read. So I was wondering if it would be at all useful for me to give a brief high-level overview of what I put in there. That would help inform the discussion.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I was partially kind of thinking on, I guess, discussions we've had in the past on this initiative where I thought there was still plans for a consultant to do a lot of this white paper work. But I may have to reframe my thoughts on it if it's something that you're working on right now. But yeah, if you can provide a quick overview on that, that'd be great.
Okay, yeah, just so a little context. Merrick asked me a couple months ago if I'd start working on this. In the proposal, it says the idea was this white paper would be developed collaboratively between council and NIMS staff and general counsel. I did initially reach out to the region and was, I guess, I would say, sort of rebuffed in terms of collaboration. So in typical fashion, I said, well, I'll just do it myself. So a little context. But anyways, in terms of contents, just so you have an idea, it has, I guess, let's see, probably 4 sections. One section reviews the applicable law requirements. So that's MSA, NEPA, Administrative Procedure Act, things like that, kind of going through the statutory requirements, the related regulations, and then there's a lot of NIMS procedural directives and policy directives that give more specific guidelines. So it kind of reviews all that stuff. And then it has a section that does rely a lot on those procedural and policy directives, looking at various ways of, efficiency tools, if you will. And maybe kind of touched on some of these. You've all, well, not all of you, but some that are involved in process stuff have heard about them. So things like quote unquote front loading and then frameworking, as Dan mentioned. And yes, we do actually, it's not often apparent because the terms aren't used as explicitly, but there are frameworks in really all of our FMPs. And essentially frameworks allow, is a way of being able to make regulatory modifications without having to amend an FMP, I guess is kind of the short-handed way I would understand the framework concept. And so it reviews all of those and specifically how those things are used in the council process. I guess the other major thing to mention is under the Administrative Procedures Act, the so-called good cause waiver provision. So that is circumstances where full notice and comment rulemaking can be waived. And yeah, the salmon process is kind of at the extreme end of exploiting that provision in the Administrative Procedure Act and the way that they rapidly implement annual management and do in-season management. And then I went and I looked at, I think it was about 6 completed council actions and dug out the dates for major milestones. So when did the council initiate an action? When did they take final action? When did we formally transmit the action to NIMS? And then either and or when, you know, when did the rulemaking occur? So the proposed and final rule dates and or secretarial approval of an FMP amendment. So that's just kind of some data, I would say. I think the takeaway from that for me was yes, the council spends a lot of time on things, probably as much time working through the development of a proposal and deciding what to do as it takes for NIMS to implement the proposal once the council has developed it. I think the other thing I found is there are cases where there is a significant interval between when the council takes final action and we formally transmit. So formal transmittal of the proposal essentially starts a clock for NIMS that is specified in the Magnuson Act. So they need all their ducks in a row before they tell us, council staff, to send them the letter for the action. So there may be some opportunities there in terms of better coordination, sort of getting at that front-loading concept that has been identified in those procedural guidelines. That's basically it. And then I have a final section I wrote. Oh, and I guess I'd mention also in terms of various tools, I did write a section on EFPs, mainly kind of reviewing what the regulations say and what the council does and the difference between the two, and kind of, I think, gets at the point that's been made earlier that the council has a lot of process for EFPs that actually differs from the way it's described in regulation. And then I have a last section that's sort of just a idea section around really related to the other IRA project that is having to do with bycatch and so on, and dynamic ocean management, and kind of looking at how those overlaps between process and the ideas behind that that project. So anyways, that's basically what I came up with. I'm not sure what happens next with this paper. I'll be handing it off to an unknown person to take forward. So anyways, hopefully that was a little helpful in informing your thoughts around where to take that white paper.
Yeah, thanks, Kit. So we have Gwei up next. And I think while Gwei's talking, Gilly, can you advance the slides to I think it was the project timeline of where all the pieces fit together. It was 1 or 2 slides ahead. Yeah, that one. Go ahead, Gwei.
Thank you. I just the EFP discussion kind of got me thinking that this might not be a one size fits all fisheries exercise, and thinking of the EFPs, there may be different roadblocks with each group, each fishery management plan, or each type of fisheries, and thinking about ground fish, some of the roadblocks there is that, it takes the council on some of the EFPs 10 plus years to move from an EFP into regulations, and the kind of the goal gets adjusted each year, and you can never quite achieve it, and that's really on the council side. And then for other EFPs, it might be more on the NIP side. So I think in many of these roadblock issues, there's not going to be like one overall fix that we can make.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there's more roadblocks than just EFPs. So agreeing as well, or agreeing more. Go ahead, Yvonne. That'll keep me from rambling.
Thanks. So taking Dan and Gwei's comments into account and thinking about what Kit just presented to us, I think that this group today should probably spend a little time focused on providing guidance to Kit and to Gilly as to what sorts of analyses we might like to see in the white paper. And one thing that I heard that was missing, Kit, from your list of things that you wrote about was an analysis of how other fishery management councils have addressed similar issues and concerns. And so going forward, I would recommend that for each of our fishery management plans, you take a look at how other councils with similar fisheries may have addressed similar challenges. So to Dan's example, how does a multi-species groundfish fishery with multiple gear types get addressed in regulations in New England and Alaska? How do highly migratory species get addressed on the East Coast and in Hawaii? And then as kludged together as our salmon process is, it probably is the premier salmon process, at least federally, in the country. And then, how are small pelagic species like CPS handled elsewhere, or recreational fisheries, what have you? So what ideas can you glean from other fishery management councils about how to make a more flexible and adaptive decision-making process within the council? And then to that, I would just say that the Climate and Communities Initiative had a bunch of comments about wanting the council to increase its use of if-then statements in management, which would, allow NIMS to take more action with things for example, like an in-season action guidance from the council saying, I don't know, if similar to how the whiting fishery is managed with distributing or redistributing quota later in the season. So that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. I would add to that, where possible, for kind of major decisions or things that are transmitted to NIMPs, kind of repeating the analysis of how long that process takes, just so we have a comparison of, is PFNC, more or less efficient than other councils, so we can get a sense of how effective different processes might be. Go ahead, Corey.
Thanks. Yeah, well, even before Kit last spoke, I was starting to get to the point of like, we're talking about a white paper we haven't really seen yet, and yeah, I think Yvonne's suggestion is good, but I'm also not wanting to make suggestions until we've even seen a first draft. But that sounds like a standard practice we've done, and Yvonne's done a lot of work for in the past. But yeah, I think Gwei said again, kind of what I was saying earlier about we really need to figure out what the specific choke points are. Thinking of the groundfish EFP. I mean, well, we can talk about it later, Gwei, but I don't think that if we're talking about the long leader gear, that wasn't the council taking so long, I don't think. Which relates to the point that, and I don't even know how to describe it, but I was when Kit mentioned he's been doing some analysis of how long things have taken at the council and then to implement by NIMS. I just being around it, the groundfish process has gotten faster, and a lot of that is just, I think, well, a couple things is the rebuilding rockfish issue became less severe than it had been. But it's also just more common understanding of what's a mountain versus what's a molehill, and where do you have to really be rigorous with your analysis versus not require a PhD type thesis to justify what you want to do every time. And we used to be doing, as Kit will know, an EIS every 2 years for the groundfish harvest specifications, and thankfully got away from that to be a little bit more nimble. So yeah, I'm trying to how do I explain that point? Like it, and I guess the one that took us very long time to get through was gear switching, and for good reason, because it was controversial and there's still a huge dispute about the evidence and what it means and what's going to happen. And so just another example of when there's clarity, and maybe that's kind of where we're trying to get to with the HMS EFPs, is clarity on what are the important conservation issues and gear issues, in working through that, getting to kind of being on the same page, and then with everyone involved in council and NIMS, and then once you have that better understanding of what the key issues are, then things can get through the process better. And I could give like 3 or 4 examples of like the halibut we just went through in the last meeting, and although there's a handful of boats and streamer lines, it's potentially going to clog up the entire NIMS system for some reason. So yeah, I'll stop there, but I really do. It's that Gwei's case by case. I think we need to see the white paper and then trying to find those specific cases to really think through.
Yeah, thanks for that, Corey. And did you have another comment, Gwei, or is that a residual?
No, I do, Tommy. Thank you. And I really liked Yvonne's recommendation, and with that, I just wanted to give another plug for the TNC white paper that Jessica shared a link for at the beginning of the meeting. And in putting that paper together, we reviewed all of the fishery management plans in the US to identify different types of measures of flexibility. And in that paper have a kind of a summary of other measures of flexibility that we found outside of the Pacific Council, as well as some internationally. And I think it could be a good starting place for thinking about, what else is what is done elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Quay. Our list or our rate of hand raising and hands that are up have rapidly declined. And I think we've gotten really good discussion on this and kind of discussion of the project and are naturally transitioning into kind of, the work that's ahead. So I think what I'm going to do is propose that we take a 10-minute, after Corey's comment, that we take a 10-minute break just to get move around. And then maybe we can focus more on focus discussion around kind of next steps and the work that's ahead. If that makes sense to everyone. Go ahead, Corey.
Sorry, Tommy, I raised my hand before you broached the 10-minute break idea, but just quickly, yeah, we always look at what other councils do, but my thought, why stop there? Like, there's the federal regulatory process, and even just the natural resource world is not limited to the council. So, we could look at and maybe the way the white paper gets at that, but fisheries are different, of course, but there's commonalities with other regulatory processes that could be looked at.
Yeah, good call, Corey. Yeah, and so I think take a 10-minute break, come back at 11:40, and carry on from there. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tommy.
All right. I think we're, well, at 11, well, we're at 11:40 by my clock, which hasn't been the most accurate of late. My computer's running fast and I'm running slow, so hopefully we'll average out. But I guess, well, hoping that I'm not talking to myself and that everyone's back. But I was thinking, just in terms of continuing the discussion on and building off of what folks have said, it feels like the conversation or discussion was moving towards kind of next steps and work we can do and contribute to. And kind of thought I had, or straw man to put out, was that building off of the thoughts around having a look at the the draft white paper and how we can kind of contribute to and refine it, is for the EWG and EIS are scheduled to meet in person in March. So if possible, maybe having the draft report available then so that we can, as a group, dig into it and add more comments and content. And then that would help, and draft report for the April meeting when we're scheduled to have a check-in for Project One. So kind of mainly just looking ahead between to March and April at present, and seeing if that makes sense to everyone to maybe review the draft white paper as it becomes available through the winter, early spring, and then do some in-depth work on it in March at the council meeting, and draft any reports we might have in preparation for the April meeting. So thought that might be a starting point for discussion and see where we go from there. And I'll take silence as overwhelming acceptance.
I just wrote that down as a crucial next step. Maybe Tommy, I might also chime in real quick here, if that's okay, as people ponder that recommendation, that I wanted to just flag something that got pinged in my brain, if only I could remember what it was. Oh, I think it was just really quickly, just in response to, or going back to what I think Yvonne mentioned as a sort of a recommendation for sort of additions or potential potential additions or other elements of the white paper that we may want to consider spending time on, such as looking at what other councils with similar fisheries have done in this area around addressing flexibility, excuse me, little tongue twister. I think definitely yes to that. And then I was just going to flag that my murky understanding is that other councils, perhaps more than just a few, maybe even all of them, but or at least, I don't know, maybe 6 out of 8, I want to say, are also working on sort of regulatory, maybe not regulatory, but like process efficiency and responsiveness projects within their IRA proposals. So I think there may also be an opportunity for even some like near term or sort of present day conversations between different councils, and maybe not at the council level, but at least at sort of the staff or advisory body level, like just, hey, how are you guys tackling this? And I know not every council is going to be grappling with the exact same set of questions, but I think there is sort of like a management responsiveness and efficiency / flexibility theme that is threading through a number of the different IRA proposals. I have not seen the other IRA proposals, but just based on their titles and just conversations with folks who are tracking this more specifically, I think there could be some opportunities there for, I don't know, I won't say collaboration because that's asking a lot, of course, but just sort of lessons learned, both past and current, as people explore this further. Anyway. Just wanted
to.
I think
it'd be great, and might be something you can run in parallel with I'm also noting we're, for this project in particular, the first deliverables on a fairly short timeline, and don't want to slow it down any further. But yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And yeah, that's a good point, right? There's this sort of like slightly front-loaded timeline around, right, a white paper sooner rather than later. And then, but there's also this sort of secondary, or not secondary, but sort of next step, if things go according to the sort of how it's been laid out in the proposal around an entity of some kind, whether it's a working group or an ad hoc committee or something, that some collection of humans would put together a report for council consideration that would be a little bit more specific to how this would get applied. And so that might be another place to kind of also flesh out some of these ideas. Not to shortchange the white paper at all, but just that there will be another another venue in which this can happen, that these conversations can happen. Talk about efficient. We're going to do 2 reports, but one will hopefully lead to the other.
Yeah, actually. And I think we could also just view the white paper as a starting off point and maybe a bit of a living document that we can amend as we go along.
Exactly. That sounds great.
Yeah. Go ahead, Corey.
I think that I was going to ask something similarly, excuse me, and a little bit late getting back for the break, but yeah, was the purpose to make the perfect white paper, or like, are we saying bring a draft and the goal will be to finalize the white paper and it'll be the most useful reference we've ever seen and continue to be, or is it just like you said, to get the discussion started and to the point of what Gilead says about which humans are doing what and when?
I'm personally, to echo myself, I'm in favor of a draft white paper for kind of advisory body review in March and further review in April, as just to keep it on schedule. And then as this process moves forward, it could be further amended as needed. All right. Well, being that the 10-minute break seemed to have put everyone to sleep rather than waking people up, or maybe it's my dulcet tones. Looking at some of the other items we had to discuss for today, up on the screen we have our kind of tentative timeline. And one of the things that we've, I guess we were waiting until we had more details to really be able to comment on it, are kind of the who's doing what and when and where and expertise that's needed. And we've had some discussion or suggestion on making some form of like a working group, subcommittee, or a whole nother ad hoc group, whatever we want to describe it as a way to kind of carry out this work. And then kind of building on the SSC model, that group could then report back to the EWG and EAS, and the ecosystem advisory bodies would then kind of keep shepherding the process forward and kind of serving as a review body. So to that end, is there interest at this point of forming any type of a subcommittee or working group to basically work a bit more, or work with Kit or on this white paper, or when his draft is out, to kind of do the initial review and comments on it? Or are we more comfortable waiting until March and kind of going over this draft white paper as a group? Go ahead, Corey.
Well, I would pose the question to Kit, I guess, given that he only has so much time before he gets to go do other stuff for fun, what would be most helpful to him and Gilead, I guess?
Yeah, fair enough. Be pragmatic, Corey. Let's see if Kit or Gilly has a response on that. Otherwise, They can chime in later.
I'll just say I have pretty limited time to do anything. I'm basically going to be done next week. I won't be officially retired until a little after the new year, but be taking some time off. I guess there's a question that Gilly will have to also resolve in terms of just distributing the draft that I prepared. So that would be the first step, presumably.
Yeah, and I'll
Use
just chime. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Gilly. Yeah, go ahead, Gilly.
Oh, great. Excellent. Thanks, Tommy, and thanks, Kit. I think, yeah, I think one of the reasons why this this draft white paper kind of arrived on the scenes somewhat recently, and kind of like, oh my goodness, like I think Merrick was like, let's see if we can just get some things down on paper before this imminent retirement date, which is looming large over here for Kit. So that's so, and yes, it sounds like it would be great to sort of have that be a thing that doesn't necessarily have to be finalized, or it doesn't have to be like formally published or anything like that, but certainly can be added to going forward from here. And I personally love the idea of having it be something that the EWG and the EAS get to dig into at the March meeting, or at any juncture before then if they would like to, and if maybe we'll have to figure out here on this side of on the staff side, whether that's something that we're continuing to work on at the staff level, or if it would be better to sort of open it up for folks to kind of collaborate on more broadly. But yeah, I think it is definitely something that does not have to be like, it doesn't have to be perfect, absolutely, even though it currently is, I'm sure, exactly that, but we'll make it even more so as we go along. And then I think the other thing I was just going to say is that I think, Tommy, you had sort of wondered about maybe would there be some utility to forming would there be a desire or an appetite for folks to form a sort of a project, maybe like a little project subcommittee? I'm not sure if that was exactly your question, maybe, and that might be a little bit different than sort of like a council formed ad hoc working group, but might there be any interest in doing kind of smaller subcommittees or subgroups of EWG and EAS folks, and possibly others from other FMP advisory bodies that sort of assemble as needed to sort of look at some of these materials and other products in order to either work on them or bring them back to the EWG and the EAS for review and consideration. I know that's one idea that has come up, I think, at the EWG level. Like, would there be sort of like an advantage to having sort of a small group that does some of the deeper thinking on individual projects, and then bring stuff back to the larger group, recognizing that there's always the threat of the danger of having too many groups that people have to be tracking. But to the extent that that could be helpful, I wasn't sure if that was what you were touching on, Tommy, or if you were thinking maybe of something a little bit different, but just wanted to pick up on that thread.
Yeah, no, that's what I was referring to. And I guess for those who don't who don't listen to all the EWG meetings, the thought is to have some type of smaller working groups or bodies, so that with these 3 projects, that's essentially the comparable to 3 initiatives running at once. And rather than having the entire EWG track all 3 and be engaged in all of the work that goes on, the thought was to potentially form 3 subcommittees that could focus on each and then report back to the wider body. That way the workload's more distributed, and it can, those who have an interest or an expertise can focus where they're
Thanks.
most able.
Yeah, I wanted to respond
go ahead,
to your
Teresa.
question of should there be a group of people who look at the white paper before March, and looking at timing, whether it's a voluntary group or I'll yield to what the group should look like, but it seems like there's an opportunity in January, February to take a first look at the white paper and do any additional work or commentary on it before March, because as we all know, that March, April turnaround's really fast. So if you just look at very logically, if we all waited till March, we might not have a lot of time to adjust, edit, add before April. So I think there is an opportunity January, February to do that. That I'd be happy to participate in, and I think is a good use of that time.
All right, we have our first volunteer. Excellent. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thanks. I was also going to volunteer and just say that I like your idea, Tommy, of having the EWG and EAS look at it, discuss in March so we can prepare our reports for April. But also be able to volunteer to help Gilly finalize the white paper for that review prior to March, if depending on, what I leave it up to Gilly to assess kind of what she might need at that point. Thanks.
All right, this is what we like to see. Volunteers coming fast and furious.
It's so exciting.
Okay. And I think also in terms of this, this would be like the EWG is already an ad hoc group, and we tend to be fairly informal, but I guess what I'm proposing is even less formal. And I would definitely invite folks from other advisory bodies who might want to contribute, just because, it could, more expertise the better, and more varied expertise. And seems like we have pretty good support for trying to get this draft report polished up prior to the March meeting, and then advisory bodies discussing it in March. We could probably, if we're feeling ambitious, even try to do kind of one of the all hands type meetings akin to what we do for the ecosystem status report. Could you thank you. Kind of what we do for the ecosystem status report of just to allow a space for the other advisory bodies to meet and discuss, and that could probably be done either before the March meeting or before the April meeting, just because this isn't scheduled to be discussed by the council till April. But as was noted, those meetings tend to be a very quick turnaround. Sorry, trying to catch up with my train of thought here. Looking ahead at this kind of straw person timeline, I don't think we need to use our crystal ball to peer far ahead, because in the past that's usually hasn't. We've had a lot of discussion and then things kind of go tangential and we just rephrase it. But it's looking like April is a check with council, and then kind of June through November of this year or next year is when a working group will be formed and meet to discuss kind of efficiency options. So that kind of implies that by June, this kind of white paper and proposed approaches need to be, or proposed type of things, proposals need to be somewhat fleshed out, and then will be passed over to what I'm presuming will be another kind of short-lived ad hoc group who will work to meet and identify opportunities. So I mainly is focused on this white paper right now because that's what's in front of us. So timeline then would be March, kind of advisory body review, present to council in April, presumably receive more feedback. Both March and April would also be a time for public comment, and then try to get a penultimate or more final version of this white paper done by June to better inform who might be on this working group, and presumably council would then be asking for volunteers to be part of that working group in June and task them with working on on that body of work through November of next year. So hopefully that all sounds reasonable, and I think just for the next 6 months, basically, we can just focus on the white paper. Oh, and Whitney's noting that some AVs aren't scheduled to attend in April, so I think maybe trying to do a virtual all-hands meeting prior to the March meeting. That way, advisory bodies can either, who are meeting in March can draft a letter for April, and those who are meeting in April can draft one in April. But try to give all the advisory bodies a chance to review and comment as they can. So anyways, I'm rambling now, but does that sound like a kind of feasible way forward for the next kind of 6 to 8 months? And then come June, that's kind of the next big bite of the apple, and hopefully that will become more fleshed out then, because that's kind of needing guidance from council on which direction we're going to go. Again, I take silence as everyone appreciates what I'm saying and are just overwhelmed by my words and thoughts.
I had my hand up, Tommy. But
sorry, I'm looking at the wrong tab on my screen as well. Go ahead, Corey. At least somebody's not overwhelmed by me.
No, I think that sounds reasonable, but I still have the same question about, is our goal to produce this white paper or help produce the white paper? A lot of people are willing to chip in, but Kit's leaving and it's going to be left to Gilly. Or is it to just let the white paper stand? And these aren't either ors, they're somewhere in the middle probably, but just get to recommendations on the working group and the ultimate piece of which actions would be fruitful to try this thing kind of out on. So again, just wondering how much you said. The only thing that you caught my ear was focus on the white paper for 6 months. I think it's maybe slightly different to focus on advising the council on what we think the right working group might be and recommending actions that we think they could, that working group might want to discuss as possibly being doable by June 2027.
Yeah, definitely. That's well said, Corey. I think maybe like whatever subgroup is formed could help Gilly shepherd along the white paper, and then broader advisory bodies could comment on it in March and April, trying to get something polished up for June. And then, advising on what that composition of the body to be formed in June would look like, and what they might be able to accomplish would be another task that would be quite important. All right. Looking for more comments here. Otherwise I'll go back to looking at the kind of detailed agenda that Gilly had put together that's on my other screen here.
Thanks, Tommy. I was just going to...
go ahead, Gilly.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say real quick, thank you so much for laying that out the way you did just now, and Corey for your comments as well. And I think, just from this perspective, I think that all sounds great. Of course, I defer entirely to EWG and EAS folks and others, but in terms of just sort of the pace and timing, I think that feels like it's a good fit with sort of keeping things moving forward, and whatever the various pieces are, in a way that aligns with the sort of the larger the overarching kind of timeframe and deadline, if we want to call it that, for late 2027, and that the sort of the near-term focus on the white paper, I think, would be it would be relatively condensed, it sounds like, because all of a sudden we are, the holidays are upon us. And so we really would be looking at more like sort of maybe digging back in January and a little bit of February. And then suddenly it would be time for, potentially an all hands briefing if we wanted to go that route. So we would really only be kind of grappling with the white paper itself, probably in a very specific way for another couple of months is what I can gather. And then, sort of having that sort of give way to the sort of the next round of discussions about, okay, what opportunities are out there, and does the council want to put together a crew of a merry band of travelers to work on that, or is there another pathway or what have you? But I feel like that would set us up well for those next steps. Yeah. I'll stop there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gilly. One other area for that or kind of point we've raised in the past and area for discussion for EWG in particular, since we're an ad hoc group and can change our membership on the fly, is the required expertise of basically making sure that EWG feels that we have sufficient expertise in our membership to adequately comment on this this project, or if we need to make some requests for additional membership. So thought I'd open that up a bit just to see how we're feeling on this one. And again, we have calls for the other two projects later this week and next week. So same question will come up then as well. But do we feel we have the necessary expertise to comment on or to work on this project, or do we need to bring on additional expertise specifically for this project? And I think this is also something that, as we approach different milestones within this project, we could make specific requests as needed. So, in the sticking with the theme of nimbleness and adaptability, we can take advantage of our ad hoc group. Do you have a comment, Kiva? I'll take that as a no.
Nope, sorry, my bad.
Oh, no worries. All right. So kind of looking over my agenda here, I think that we've kind of, in a roundabout way, worked through most of the topics that were on the agenda. So we might be able to get back, an hour and a half of our day, unless there's other things we feel we need to talk about. I'd say next steps is those who want to help with the kind of the initial review and drafting of the white paper, basically, walking in the footsteps of Kit Dahl and picking up where he's what he's leaving us. Is we can't try to get some or basically some calls together for that group for look at like January and early February. Basically trying to get things done before the advanced briefing book deadline for March. And I guess that would be those would be working meetings, so I'm assuming they'd have to be federally noticed.
That's probably correct, yes. I can also clarify that. If they're working, anyway, I can definitely look into that and see what the best course of action.
I guess, because there's decisional meetings, and then there's also more of the non-decisional meetings where it's just a informal drafting group where we're just group writing. So yeah, I guess if we need to make them publicly noticed, we can. Otherwise, we can keep them as an informal drafting group, and then with formal discussion and decisions made in public meetings. So Yeah, but I'll let you check internally, Gilly, for what needs to be done there.
Sure.
And we did have some hands go up as volunteers. It looks like we had Andrew, Gway, Deb. I guess I'd be happy to help out as well. If anyone else is interested, let us know, or you can, I guess, let myself or Gilly know, or you can chime up now. And yeah. Anyways, I'll kind of see if there's anything we missed, pass over to Gilly to see if there's anything I missed, and if anyone else has any points they'd like to raise for before we wrap up.
Awesome, thank you. And I think the only other two people that I think I heard express willingness to jump in are Teresa and Michelle. And not to inadvertently volunteer you guys, but I think I heard you both say, sure, why not? But feel free to correct that record. But yeah, no, that sounds great. And we can sort of grapple with some sort of scheduling conversations going forward for sure.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gilly. Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, true. I want to be helpful somehow. I don't know, commenting on this, I'm just still confused about where, not in a bad way, but where the best place to contribute, but definitely want ideas. But I was going to be the annoying person to ask if you called for a public comment yet. Not that we.
Oh, good call.
I
always forget about
force
that.
my lunch into that 10-minute break, but yeah, just want to thanks for running thing. But yeah, if before you called it, good. See if there's anyone.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I always forget about public comment. Yeah. So open up now. See if there's any public comment. Any burning questions or thoughts, concerns? All right. Following Yvonne's advice and giving it, 8 to 10 seconds of awkwardness. All right. Not seeing any hands come up. I think, yeah, there still is things still aren't fully clear, but I think they're clearer, and at least we can muddle our way through March at the least. So I guess with that, I personally thank everyone for coming out. I'll pass over to Teresa and Michelle as the EAS, sorry, co-chairs to see if they have any closing remarks.
Oh, go ahead, Michelle. I don't have any closing remarks, so I pass it to you.
Thanks, Tommy. Go ahead. No. Oh, I don't either. Just thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. And I imagine we'll see a fair number of you again on Friday for when we start talking about Project 2. And for those brave souls who put their hands up, I guess Gilly or myself or both will kind of reach out for planning for the next steps.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks everyone. And yeah, enjoy your afternoon and unexpected lunchtime.
I know, I'm glad everybody gets to eat. Thank you all so much.